Hi, good morning. Hope you had a good time with your 15 minutes break. Like Ed mentioned, I am going to be talking about going beyond password, the future of user authentication. And this talk is something I'm very interested in because, there's been a lot of changes and new things around the authentication space. And essentially, I'm going to be sharing with you some alternatives to password that are even more secure. I am Gift, developer advocate at Cloudflare, but I'm also an Auth0 ambassador. Auth0 is a platform for adding authentication into your apps. So some of the examples that I'll share here today would be using Auth0. Okay, so for the longest time, we have relied on your typical, email address, password, or username password as the traditional or default way to get people authenticated on the internet, right? Most platforms you go to today to log in, you possibly find that as an option. But with the rise of cybercrime, data breaches, and bad actors, passwords have become more of a liability rather than an actual security measure. I would like to do a survey. Please indulge me, right? I would ask you a few questions, and if you could relate with any of that, can you just show like your hands, just like Nick there? The first question is, if you've ever stored your password in a notepad, whether that is like a few years ago or recently, can I see hands? Okay, I see some people. Okay, that's good. I have done that too, so I'm also guilty. Second question, if you've ever used the same password for most of your, okay, more hands for that one, like you have the same password for Twitter, Facebook, is easier, right? Okay. And then the last one, if you've ever used your name or date of birth for password or your ATM PIN, are there guilty people here? Okay, a few people, that's good. Now, the thing is, a lot of people use things that you're familiar with, right, to use as passwords, but entirely it's not safe to do some of these things. And the reason is, first, it's sometimes easier to guess password or passphrases that are related to you, for example, your name, your email address, your date of birth. That's how people get hacked every day. This report is from Tom's Guide. This is from 2022, and this is showing the worst ranked passwords of 2022. People use things like Qwerty, right? I can just sign in and just tap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's so easy to get signed in. People use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 because it's easier to remember. But none of that is safe, specifically for your, important details on the internet. You don't want people to get hacked, or you don't want to get hacked, right? Another interesting analytic I would like to share is also a report from the very recent data breach that showed that over 84% of the breaches that happened in 2021 was due to either stolen or weak passwords. So that goes to show that there's a lot of people out there that are using insecure passwords to log into their applications or different services that they use. Now, as developers in this room, I know that we are pretty familiar with the guidelines for what a secure password looks like, but I would just like to reiterate that here. We should be making sure that we have verification / validations to check that for every platform we are building authentication for, first, that people are using a combination of uppercase, lowercase symbols to create their passwords, and also make sure people are avoiding using guessable. Like I've seen a few platforms where they have like tooltips, for example, or sometimes you get a validation back when you try to create a very short password, like 4-character password, right? Because that's not secure. So we should make sure that we follow these guidelines. Another one is you should make sure you have different passwords for each account that you're creating. And finally, make sure that your password is at least 12 characters long. 12 characters is a good place to start. And of course, I know this is a lot. Like, I want to create a password right now, and I have to be doing this checklist of things. That's why you have password managers to automatically create more secure passwords for you. Now, who here is familiar with this website? Cool, okay. Have I Been Pawned is essentially a website that allows you to check if your email address or your password has been compromised in a data breach. In that demo, I was trying to check one of the passwords that I used to use in like 2012. I used it everywhere, right? And I was checking. Luckily, it was not in any data breach, but I don't use that anymore. So essentially, how it works is just put in a password, and then it checks if your data has been breached, so you can always go and change it. Like I mentioned, there are password managers, right? You don't have to always think about, okay, I need to create 12 characters that has symbols. Is that so difficult to do for every time you have to create a password? That's why there are different password managers out there like LastPass, Keeper, 1Password that you can use. But is that the most secure way to, create your password, right? Is having a password manager the best possible thing you can do right now? Actually, no. Because even with password managers, there are still password breaches. The most recent one that I could find was LastPass breach that happened in December 2022. If you are familiar or you use LastPass, you probably got an email from them, or you saw it on the internet, and I panicked. I went and I changed my master password just because I don't want, any implications for my own passwords, right? So using password manager as an extra authentication layer for you to be secure is not entirely the best approach. I would go on to show you or share alternatives, but I also wanted to share this tweet from Angie Jones. She made this tweet, when was that? In March. And she posted like a screenshot. I don't know what specific application is that, but in order for you to create an account, they ask you to create a public-private key, and then they ask you to save it so you don't misplace it, because once you do, that's the end. And this actually made me realize why the other alternative might not be the best solution, right? So this is, I'll let you answer that. Is this a good replacement for password? Because I'll give you an example. If you're familiar with crypto wallets, Trust Wallet, they do something very similar where they give you like a passphrase and then they ask you to keep it safe. Because what? If you misplace that, your money is, gone forever. And that happened to me. I lost $250 because I sold my phone without, I had the passphrase in a notepad, and then I sold the phone and everything was lost, right? And my money till today is unrecoverable. So that's also another example or alternative to password, but is it essentially the best possible way for you to store your passwords? I don't think so. Authentication plays a key role in driving seamless and secure digital experience for yourself, your users, everybody right now trying to access the internet. They sometimes will have like an authentication, process that they have to get into get into the platform. Most people will have, different types of ways for users to authenticate, but the most familiar one you find is someone asking you for your username and a password. But I think there are different approaches that could pass off as better to use in place of password and with passwords. So what is the best approach? Today I'm going to be sharing 3 different alternatives that I find are very useful and even more secure for you rather than password. And the first one being passwordless authentication. The second one I'll share is multi-factor authentication. And finally, I'll talk about single sign-on authentication. So are you excited? Let's get into it. So the first one, passwordless. I like to think of passwordless as the future of authentication, because you're bashing passwords, you don't need them anymore. You can authenticate into any platform without having to create a password. And similar platforms that offer you passwordless authentication have different ways they can do it, but specifically Auth0 gives you 3 different ways that you can run passwordless authentication. So you can either do something with magic links, OTP, or SMS. I'm sure you've you've possibly seen this out there in the wild. Like, you try to log into or sign up on a platform, and then instead of them asking you for a password, what they do is they ask you for your email address, and then you get a magic link, or you get a 6-digit code through your phone, depending on what specific method that they are using for passwordless. Essentially, passwordless would eliminate the use of password, which creates a more secure authentication method and reduces the risk of cyber attacks and data breaches. I want to show you an example. I hope this is clear enough. I want to show you an example with how you can actually integrate passwordless into your application. So this is a Next.js example. I made a very small demo to show this, but pretty much Auth0 offers you a different types of libraries and SDK, whether that is for PHP, React, Next.js, and so on. So here I'm using the Next.js library to kind of factor in authentication using passwordless. But first, I wanted to show you what the typical one looks like, which is, they call it universal login. So it's your typical email address and password, right? And what I did here is I just imported the library, and I have it working. Interestingly enough, you have other, types of authentication you can add, like social media login, for example. You can log in with Google, Facebook, and so on. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm typically signing up with a username and password. So that's universal. But what if I wanted to change that? Like, I want to remove the password portion of it and instead replace that with either the magic link or the SMS. And that's where Auth0 has something called passwordless connections that enables you to add passwordless into your pre-existing application. So from what I had in the previous demo, I just need to go to the dashboard and select the passwordless connection. In this example, I'm selecting both. So I would like to give my users the opportunity to either use the magic link option with their emails or use SMS. Now that I've turned that on, the next thing you would see is I'm selecting what application in the dashboard that I want this turned on for. My application there is called the giftcode.dev. And after turning that on, there have advanced options. This is optional if you want to use a customized login screen. That's also possible, so I'm selecting that. And then finally, this is what you have. So the difference is when I try to sign in, instead of the username password, what I get is a username, and then, I get an email field, and then I get a code sent to my email, and with that, I am successfully logged in, removing and eliminating the password process. So that is one way you can actually, do modern authentication in your application. Another way I would like to highlight is something called multi-factor authentication. So it's three things. It's one, something that you know, so it could be a password, a passphrase, or a PIN. Two, it's something that you have. It could be a soft or a hard token. And finally, it's also something that you are, so your biometrics, fingerprint, Face ID, and so on. So in order to have multi-factor authentication implemented, you need these three things. Also, there are different ways this could happen, right? So you could use SMS notifications, so you have a user-signed login, but you don't give them direct access to the platform. You ask for an extra way for them to identify that they are actually the users of that application they are trying to sign into. So, for example, one thing you find very common is when you try to log in, you will be asked to either go to your email, get the code that was sent to you. That's an extra factor of authentication there. Or with voice notifications, you get a call, and then there is like an automated voice telling you 6-digit code where you can enter to gain access. So it's not just the username password, is an extra authentication on top of that, just to make sure nobody can, access or hack into your accounts. Right? And then the other one that I really like, and I have a funny story about this one, is something called FIDO security keys. So you can also do multi-factor authentication with like something called a YubiKey. Is anyone familiar with that? Yeah, cool. Okay, so I mentioned that I have a story. I'll tell you that story, but first I'll show you a demo of what that looks like. So if I'm trying to set up multi-factor authentication in my application with Auth0, on the dashboard you have different options, right? So depending on your use case and what you like to do, if you like to use one-time notification or SMS, voice, whatever you want to use. You just have to select the connection and turn it on. And then this is a typical flow of what happens, right? So when you choose to either do SMS and, okay, this is both of them now. If you choose to have SMS and voice turned on, what happens is the first time you try to log in, it asks you for your username, and then asks you which of this option would you like, because I have both of them turned on. So would you like to receive an SMS, or would you like to receive a call? And then once I select that, either of these happens, right? So I get a call with a code, or I get an SMS with a code that I can then use to access the application. So 2 factors there. First, my password, and second, the voice or the SMS. There's also the OTP authentication method, where if you ever use Google Authenticator app or LastPass Authenticator app, it does something very similar, right? To set it up, you need to, scan a QR code from the platform, and then every time you try to log in, you would be asked to enter a 6-digit code to access your application. Now, I mentioned the FIDO keys. This is essentially how it works. So it's a similar process. You try to log in, but then you don't get access immediately. You are asked to authenticate using your device, right? So you either touch that device to sign in, or depends on the one you're using. If you're using it on your phone, you have to put it close to your phone for it to work. Okay, now, the story that I said I will tell you. I came to Sofia 2 days ago. That was Tuesday. And at the airport, when I got there, my laptop, I had 2 laptops with me, was in my backpack. I don't know, I think I was excited, so I dropped my laptop. And I checked, everything looked fine, good. Got to my hotel, I was trying to sign into, this is my work laptop now. By the way, I have a small FIDO key attached to my laptop, and I discovered that that is broken. Right, so it means that I can actually I can log in because I know what my password is, but I can access anything right now because my key is broken and I'm here in Sofia. The backup key is in Amsterdam, so for the next few days, it's been interesting because I have to, instead of chatting, I have to go to Discord to talk to my teammates. And this is not a situation of me getting hacked, it's just a situation of me being careless. Well, it's the same thing, right? That's how a lot of companies bake in security into their platform, where wherever the employee is, once there is a breach or kind of an attack, they can actually log into the systems. And 2 specific companies that have been able to contain phishing attacks is Cloudflare, where I work, because we use FIDO keys, and Netlify also use FIDO keys, and they've been able to stop phishing attacks. So FIDO keys is built on top of a web authentication API called WebAuthn, right? So this is what is basically backing up the process of you trying to sign in with any of those hardware keys. And the great thing here is that it is supported on most browsers. As you can see with the diagram I have up there, Firefox is still trying to get there. Firefox and Opera Mini. Who uses Opera Mini still? Does anybody know Opera Mini? Nope. Okay, I used to use it 2005. Yeah. So those are the browsers that are still, trying to get full compatibility with this API. Now, the other thing I would like to share, I'm sure most of you are wondering why have I not mentioned it yet, is one called passkeys. So passkeys is even more secure in that you ditch all the extra authentication methods. You just sign in directly using your Face ID or your fingerprint. So what are passkeys? Passkeys is a new way to authenticate users without having to enter a username or a password or provide any additional authentication factor. Really, how does that work? I have a demo that I will show you, but basically, passkeys uses something called cryptographic keys, and there are 2 pairs of that key. So one is a public key that gets registered with the online service that you're trying to sign into, and then one is a private key that gets stored in the device that you're trying to sign in with. This is a demo of how passkeys works with Auth0. So I already turned on passkeys in the dashboard, and I have it, oh, okay, that demo is fast, and I have it with my demo application. What happens is, this is going to replay, but what happens is when I'm trying to sign up for the first time, a key is stored both on the service that I'm signing with as a public key, and a private key is also stored in my MacBook. So you can sign in from your phone, is the private key stored on your phone. And then the next time you try to sign in, you only just need to use your fingerprint if you're signing in on your MacBook, or your Face ID if you're signing in with your phone. Now, I really like this because it takes away all the extra bits of creating a password or even having to receive a code or SMS notification just to get into an application. This is still new, but I've seen a lot of adoption, right? I even went on to see what platforms are actually using this today. And interestingly enough, these platforms actually have full access for passkeys for their customers. Early this year, I know Google officially rolled out passkey support for everyone. Right now, I use passkeys with my Google account. GitHub has done that as well. Amazon did the same last week. So you see there is adoption for this because, of course, it's beneficial as a way to make the platform more secure and avoid cyber attacks or phishing attacks. But also, personally, as a user, I really just want to get signed in. I don't want to have to think about password and stuff. So passkeys is really the next, big thing in the authentication space, and I'm here for all of it. All right, so the last authentication alternative I'll share is something called single sign-on authentication. And essentially what that is a way to allow your users to access many different applications using one credential, right? So you don't have to have several different credentials to access different platforms. And a very, relatable example is Google. Now, when you have a Google account and you sign into Google, what happens is you have access to, Gmail, Google Docs, Google Drive, and if you notice, you didn't have to sign into those other platforms, right? So that's an example of single sign-on in play. And single sign-on has a few benefits I'd like to highlight. First, it improves the user experience. Personally, as a user, you don't have to remember too many passwords. You don't have to, because you can use one credentials to access different applications. It just makes it a lot easier and productive for you to remove. You don't have to even store, like if you remember that one password, you don't have to store it in the password manager. I mean, you should, so that you remember it, and it's better safe in a password manager than on a notepad or on a notebook, right? But it makes it super productive for you because you eliminate a lot of other password that you would have to create for the different platforms. It also helps organization better control user access and permissions, right? If you ever work in a big company, you find that, yeah, you have to use different softwares. And to make it even more easier for your admins to have access and control the user permissions and stuff, it's important to have single sign-on auth enabled so that as an employee, when you sign into something like Okta, you have access to all the different platforms, GitHub, Figma, and the rest, and you do not have to create accounts for the other platforms or services that you use. Okay, so there are two authentication protocols that enable single sign-on to be possible. The first one is called OpenID Connect, and then the second one is called SAML protocol. Now, these are they're very different. They have different use cases. OpenID is mostly used for like social media and email account authentication, where whenever you try to sign in, it tells you to sign in with Google, and then you find that in different platforms that you try to log into, you don't necessarily have to create a new account. You can always use your Google account to sign into that platform. And on the SAML side, SAML is used mostly for organizations, and it works with different ways to get you logged in, either using digital certificates or using a typical username and password. Both of them are really good ways to get authenticated, but they work for different situations. So depending on the use case, you would want to use one of these protocols. So I'm going to try to explain how single sign-on works using this illustration, and I hope at the end you understand it. So I'm going to explain two scenarios. The first one is a non-single sign-on scenario where I, a developer, I'm trying to build a platform where I can sign into one domain and also use the same credentials to sign into the next domain. So what I have here is two domains, domain 1 and domain 2. Now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to share the session storage between the first domain and share it to the second domain. Now this, let's just assume that the first one is abc.com and the second one is def.com. Is that possible? Is it possible to share some data credentials from one domain to another? Is it?
Yeah, it's possible if you have the same parent domain and you're on different
Subdomain, yeah, good. But I'm talking of different domains entirely. Say you have like google.com and chatgpt.com. Yeah. So that's not possible because of something called cross-origin policy, where it causes cause errors. We know cause errors. We are familiar with it. Every time you're building an API and trying to consume that API within your front-end application and you don't have core setup, you find that you also have that error. So it's not possible to do that. But if you're trying to still do this, there is a way, right? And the way is to bring something called an auth server to kind of act as an intermediary between both domains. So you're sharing the same session storage through the auth server to the second domain. So Auth0 has that, possible because they have single sign-on authentication as one of their offerings, where they act as the auth server in between both domains. So what happens is when you try to sign into domain 1, your session or cookie is shared with Auth0's auth server, so that the next time you try to log into the second domain, what happens is it checks if you've actually signed in before, if there is any stored session, and then reuses the same credentials to get you logged in. So that's how it's possible, for example, with Google, where you sign into Gmail, you go to the next, maybe Google Drive. I'm pretty sure they have, I don't know what their architecture of infrastructure is, but I'm pretty sure they are checking to see if there's shared credentials in play there. So that's your typical, scenario of how single sign-on works. And yeah, I think it's pretty productive for people that, have this setup, especially for organizations that are building, that have a lot of softwares for their employees to use. So I have explained here 3 major alternatives to password, the first one being passwordless, the second one being multi-factor, and then the last one, single sign-on. But if you are currently a developer at work and you know that you've been gaming for them to change what they have, you don't necessarily have to change it immediately. You can slowly adopt it by giving people options, right? So most platforms you go to, you see them ask you for username, password, but underneath, there's an option to, for example, in my demo, option to use passkeys or option to use something else, right? So it can be adopted gradually. So yeah, if you're thinking of adopting modern user authentication solutions, I would say the first thing you need to do is conduct a security assessment to see what your current system is like, if there is need for change, and basically back up why you would need to implement something new, because of course, especially in legacy systems, it takes a lot of effort to get people to buy into your idea of what is new and what is modern. Secondly, choose the right authentication method, right? I shared like 3 different or 4 different approaches that you can use today. So it's best to know which one fits your use case. Secondly, if you decide that, oh yeah, gift, this is good, but I'm going to stick with passwords, right? Make sure that you have strong password policies in place. Like, don't allow people sign into your platform or sign up for your platform with a password like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make sure that you have validations in place to allow them create secure passwords. Educate your users, educate people, right? So what I'm doing right here is essentially that, right? If you find something interesting around authentication, security that would help people be secured on the internet, right? Share that, whether that is by tweeting, giving a talk, writing a blog post and stuff, or having like a lunch and learn session at work. That's also a good way to do it. And then finally, continue to monitor and check on what is, currently up out there in the security space right now, I think it's passkeys, because a lot of people are currently adopting it in their platform. So yeah, I would leave you with this rhetorical question. Please feel free to meet me later to answer if you have an answer for it. But do you think passwords are going away completely? Right? Personally, I think so, but I'll leave that to you. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate seeing you all. If you'd like to... It's right on time. If you'd like to get access to the slides, please scan the QR code to access it. Thank you very much.